Buenas tardes. Good afternoon from Seattle, ancestral home to Coast Salish people. I'm Angela Henorio, emerita in GWSS, and your co-host for tonight's Zoom conversation. Co-hosting with me is Sean McNeil. Sean, could you please let us see you? Thank you. Um, who is the IT guru for the business school. This program is part of the 50th anniversary of celebration of the GWSS department, and it focuses on the Women of Color Collective, a student-led collective that was active at our campus for about 6 years, beginning in academic year 2006-07. This program is being recorded and will last 90 minutes. The last half hour will be for Q&A. Once I finish speaking, participants' microphones will be muted and will be unmuted for the Q&A. The chat function will be on throughout, so I invite you to share now in the chat your names and location, and to use the chat to join in the conversation. During the Q&A, please raise your hands. Before I pass the baton over to Madhuvi Murthy, who will moderate the discussion, I want to do two kinds of acknowledgements. The first is gratitude. Thanks for the tech support from the Foster School of Business, especially Sean McNeil and his capable team. Thanks to Catherine Richardson and Shirley Yi, who supported this program with the same determination that they do all things GWSS. And thanks to the moderator and panelists who made time in their busy schedules for this conversation. The second acknowledgement is a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of healing and reparation, we acknowledge the Coast Salish people, the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot, in whose unceded lands the University of Washington, Seattle is located. Our work aims at creating spaces for previously displaced or ignored ways of knowing. Our lives are committed to social justice in convivencia. Now, we will mute your microphones, and turn off your video to save energy until the Q&A. And here is Madhuvi.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you to the GWSS department at UW for inviting me and all of us, my fellow panelists here. It's so wonderful. This is going to be a conversation amongst old friends, but it's so wonderful to do it within as a part of these celebrations. So within this, sort of broader umbrella. I'm going to, I'll briefly introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then they'll talk about the Women of Color Collective. So my name is Madhuvi Murthy. I'm an assistant professor in the Feminist Studies Department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I got my PhD from the communication department at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I see that my wonderful advisor, Relina Joseph, is in the audience. So hi, Relina. My work lies at the intersection of media studies, cultural studies, transnational feminisms, and post-colonial studies. The book that I am completing at the moment is looking at the intersection of neoliberalism and Hindu nationalism through popular cultural form in India. So with that, I'll turn it over to the panelists, maybe starting with you, Manushka, if you could introduce yourself, and then I'll go in the order in which I'm seeing your faces. So Manushka, Sarah, Monica, Martha, and then Noralise.
I have the same view. That's awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here this lovely afternoon. If you're on the West Coast, this early evening on the East Coast, where it's almost bedtime. For those of us who like to go to bed early. I'm excited to be here to see everyone. I am Manushka Celeste, an associate professor at the University of Florida. I have to remember where I am sometimes. I have a shared appointment in the Center for Gender, Sexualities, and Women's Studies Research, where I'm housed, and also African American Studies. And so I teach in both units. But I'm housed in the center. My research, I now have been calling Black feminist media studies, but it's women of color feminism, media studies, communication studies. And I too, we share an advisor, Relina Joseph. Hello, thank you for being here. And you'll hear her name over and over again tonight from us, in communication and a certificate in feminist studies.
Me next, right? I am Sarah Diaz. I am an associate professor of women's and gender studies at Gonzaga University. My area is feminist science studies. My kind of primary research up until now has been about women of color in the history of science. And I'm kind of shifting projects at this point, still very much interested in science, but shifting into kind of considering feminist health study or science of feminist science studies of health and health sciences, and really working to kind of expand into disability studies and fat studies. I'm currently working on a project I'm calling Fat Zebra, which is based on my own experience as someone with a rare chronic illness. And I'm working on a book project and a short article project. And I'll leave it there.
I think I'm next. Good afternoon, evening, morning to everyone here. First of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the GWSS department, and especially to Angela Finorio for bringing us together. I'm really emotional. I feel really, just honored to share this space with you all and to be considered a member of this collective. And so I just want to start off with a note of gratitude. My name is Monica de la Torre. I am an assistant professor in the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona State University. I am finishing a book that I started with all of you here present. My advisors are here. My dear friends that I miss so much are here, and the book will be out in December. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. No, not yet. The book is called Feminista Frequencies, Building, they changed, there's a title change, so I'm getting used to it. Building Community Through Radio in the Yakima Valley, and it's with the University of Washington Press, and I'm super just thrilled. And I just can't wait to share this conversation with you all, so thank you.
Martha, you go next.
Okay. Sorry to hold it up. I'm so excited, you guys. It's so good to see your beautiful, beautiful faces. My name is Marta Gonzalez. I'm an associate professor at Scripps Claremont College. I'm in the Intercollegiate Department of Chicanx Latinx Studies, but housed at Scripps College. But we serve all 5 Cs: Pomona, Claremont McKenna, Harvey Mudd, Pitzer. I am so excited and happy to be here. I look at gender, Chicanx, Latinx studies, popular culture, and I am so excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. Noris.
Sí. Hola a todos. Thank you so much for making this happening. It's very exciting to see so many familiar faces that I miss a lot too, like Monica was saying. And I am Noralise Rodriguez, assistant professor in women's and gender studies at Gonzaga University, here with Sarah Diaz. So we're working along with our small department, making really cool stuff. And my interdisciplinary research works around gender-based violence and feminist activism in Puerto Rico. I've been lately doing a lot of transnational collaborations with other scholars and activists in islands. So we're working on this project that we call Island Feminism. And we have an event coming up next Friday. I think there's going to be some information right now over there and on the chat. It's been great. I've been enjoying a lot of this journey and teaching and doing very interesting things. Thank you so much for being here.
Wonderful. It really is. It's such a wonderfully emotional moment. It's bringing back to me what I think was some of the best times in grad school. So let's start there. I mean, it's so wonderful to, it'll be wonderful to start there and then think about the long journeys we've been on, the trajectories we've been on to land at these points from which we've just introduced ourselves. So my first question to all of you, if you could all sort of narrate to us the inaugural moment, right? How was the Women of Color Collective conceptualized? What experiences led to that conceptualization? And what kind of conversations led to its formation? So Manushka, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm old school now as I'm hearing all of these things. I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, what year was that? So I will start. I think before the beginning, there was, I don't remember if I wrote this down anywhere. My first few quarters in graduate school at the PhD level was very different than what I imagined it would be. And so part of, for me, what I was looking for was a way to survive. And so most of our creations come out of the need to survive. And this was, I think, for all of us in different ways, that moment. So I remembered, like, I took classes from Angela, I took classes from Michelle, and Relina was my advisor. So I think in the crises of the first few quarters, it was January. It was like, I'm so corny. It was January 2008. And I was like, we need to figure something out. And so I ran to them with ideas. And I remembered being sent to talk to Wired. And I want to give a special shout out to all the Wired members. And I was like, I speak in the we still, and I think that's a part of the Caribbean stuff. I was like, we have an idea and we want to do this stuff. And they're like, who's the we? And I was like, well, I got some friends. And then they're like, where are the women of color? And I was like, where are the women of color? And so they sent me off to go find us. And so it was you, of course, don't take enough credit, but you were in the hallway, right? In those initial conversation of trying to figure out how to make this work. Balbir Singh, who's at Virginia Tech, was an early part of that conversation. Jenny Hammonds was a part of that those conversations. And the three of us actually wrote up all this sort of paperwork because you had to get money by being a student org, which was weird. So that was sort of the beginning of trying to figure out how to make it work. And within that first year, Sarah and Martha, right, joined that party and made it really quite rich. So for me, those are the moments of origins of trying to figure out how to be there and how to stay there, who we need to be there. And I think what's, for me, looking back, we would carpool like to school. Martha and I would carpool to Bothell. I had no idea she was famous the whole time. So I'm just like talking and people are like, oh, by the way, she's famous. I was like, what? So I think that the cool thing about that time and how we came together, it was really just sort of like everybody was flat, right? We were all like, how in the world do we get through this place? How do we graduate? How do we do all this stuff? So for me, the point of initiation was trying to find my way. And it was the faculty who sort of like pushed and asked questions and sent initially me, Balbir, and Jenny to different places. And of course, as we grew, right, our faculty support grew to what it is now, which I think is quite fantastic. So that was my my point.
Sarah and Martha, do you want to come in here, Sarah?
All right, I'll say a little bit. I think the first that I heard about the project that Manushka was starting was, it would have been, I think it would have been the fall of 2008, something like that. Was that the semester that we took the Chicana feminism course with Michelle? And I think, Marta, you were in that class, and Manushka, am I forgetting somebody else here who was in that class? And so I there might have been stuff in the Women of Color and Academia class, but I wasn't in that. I was in something else, in the Chicana feminism class. So I think there were conversations happening in multiple places. And Manushka, at probably mid-semester, invited me to go out for tea or coffee. And you know, this was kind of the first time that we'd known each other outside of class, and we're kind of getting to know each other. And right away, she was like, I'm doing this thing, and you are going to do the communications for it. She had like a whole job description for me and everything. She knew exactly what I was going to do. And I didn't learn until afterwards the word voluntold, but that was exactly what happened. Manushka voluntold me that I was going to do communication for this project. And I needed that so desperately at that point in my graduate school career. And I don't think I knew I needed it. I think, Manushka, you saw something that you must have known I needed it, but I did need it. I was coming out of the history department and my master's program there, and kind of recovering from that and into women's and gender studies, and this place where I had all the support, but it felt sort of, you know, there's that, like, I think I'm actually feeling that feeling right now at the end of the pandemic, right? Like, as we're like looking towards something better and things are opening up and like there's hope on the horizon, but we've been through this like just intense pressure. There's a way that like you can suddenly feel the weight of it, right? Like now that we're towards the end of that, there's a way that it's maybe safe to feel the weight of what we've all just been through. And I think that was what I was going through that semester, was feeling the weight of what I'd just been through. And so having this project to focus on, being told, here's what, not only do I want to do this, but told, here's what you specifically can do, was so life-saving, I think, in so many ways, because it gave me something to focus on that I really, really needed, beyond my studies, which were also wonderful. That class was wonderful in so many ways, but to have that connection to other people, not just Manushka, but to all of you, to people I hadn't met before, was life-saving.
I don't remember. That's right. I feel like it was Chicana feminism and also the Women of Color in Academia course. I just remember us. I know, and I had already experienced the power of like community building, right? And how important that is. And I had sort of started feeling that in the Seattle Fandango project, right? Outside of, I knew that I needed to create, or that we needed to have a way of, and an outlet for what we were going through within the academy, right? Outside, completely separated in some ways from the reality of what we were experiencing day in and day out. But I think that for me, it was really special and important to begin to have that within the academy itself. And those silos of had to have a kind of silo of survival with others, like a raft within this system and within the you know, the academy itself. And just to be able to go into a classroom or utilize one of the classrooms to plan, or however we were planning things out. And every time I'd go in, I knew that these faces understood what I was going through, and that I can, if I had any doubt about anything at all, I can come to them. And no matter how stupid the question may be, I felt very safe with them. And so for me, it was that thing, you know, when I was being told about the project, I was also being said like, and you're going to handle the music, right? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. I know music. And so to talk about music, talk about art and culture and how important it wasn't something that was questioned in any way. And it was something that I think also made this walk experience so important, in that I could bring the entirety of myself. No part of myself was checked at the door in any way, including the planning of this. And so that was really special for me to participate in, and then to look forward to the next one, right? And to see how women of color would come from other departments, and to see what was happening. What is this? And that in and of itself, the process was really important. The initial inception, the planning of it, the process of planning, the discussions we had, and then what happened in the event itself, and then the ripple effects afterwards, right? The good feelings we carried away with us, and how we've learned since then how important these moments are. So that was beautiful, and thank you again for it.
Monica, do you want to talk about your experience?
Sure. So I think what my experience coming into graduate school was that the collective had already formed. So I was really a beneficiary of a system already in place, so that when I arrived, having had an experience in my master's program of working with graduate students, and as Marta said, finding that community, finding, my people, basically, I had met Sarah at a MOX conference before I even thought I was going to apply to UW or any of that. And the reason I applied to Washington was because I heard Martha, the famous Martha Gonzalez, had gotten in and had gotten funding. So that was floating around the community, and I was like, oh, that would be dope, right? To go, not just the place where she's at and Michelle Habo-Payan is at, and but to get funded to do it, awesome. So that set me up to a trajectory, I think. And then I don't even think I made the connection when I met Sarah again, that we had maybe we did remember that we had met, but I feel that was just such a unique moment that we came together, with the identity of being graduate students, of being Chicana graduate students, and so my first semester, my first quarter in graduate school, Michelle brilliantly was like, you should take this class with my colleague Angela Quinorio, Women of Color in Academia. I was like, oh my God, there's a class about that? Mind blown, right? And so I stepped into that classroom, and life changed, right? I met not just friends, but I think Noralis and I had already met when I came to visit, and bonded over speaking Spanish, because we first started talking in English, and then something slipped and we just slipped into it. And I just felt, okay, I can make a home here, because I was going to move from, LA to Seattle. And so that was just, the best landing for me to be able to come into a space that was warm and welcoming. Although I must say that I remember the first time I met Manushka, Noralis brought me along, and it was kind of like the vetting process, which I, up until that point was just kind of let's just meet people and, hang out. And no, it was serious work, and it was a serious thing, right? It wasn't just let's hang out and get cupcakes. But it was, let's hang out, get cupcakes, and talk about how we're gonna fuck shit up, right? It wasn't, there was work to be done, right? And I think that part of it, really, it showed me such a wonderful model of working, but working in a way that wasn't destructive, that was uplifting, and that was for the betterment of all of us, right? That we weren't in competition with each other. We weren't, we were sharing resources, we were sharing papers and exams, and just, I think, it really gave me just the framework for what a great, fantastic, supportive experience is, because coming out of it, it has not been a soft landing or a good landing. So I think that having that, seeing what it could be and how it could be amazing and supportive, just makes me further advocate for myself now that I'm in, in the belly of the beast even more. So I'll turn it over to Noralis.
Yeah, I agree with everything you all say, because in part what Monica is saying about the work to be done, to me, it felt always so genuine. And it reminded me a lot of home, right? Because when I was in Puerto Rico, I come from Puerto Rico, so I was part of different groups that it felt like that. So it felt that there was no competition, and you could see so much of that in academia, right? And so having that space was almost sacred to me, because it was like, okay, like, we are here to work, we are here to do things, and also to share things that I know in other spaces I cannot share. And so that feels so good. And I was brought along to the collective as a prospective student too, that the first conference was being organized, and Manushka was going to give me a tour of the campus. So she told me, yeah, so we're doing this conference, and then I kind of forgot about it. And when I began my first semester in the fall of 2009, she made an appointment with me to meet at this coffee place where I was doing my readings for class. And she says, so this is what you're going to do for the collective. Kind of like the same that happened to Sarah. And I was like, but I'm so overwhelmed with my classes, and I don't know, I can do this. And she, yes, you can. You'll see you can. And I'm so glad that you insisted, Manushka, because the first conference that I attended was the second that the collective was doing. And it was such a great experience. I couldn't believe that we pulled together such a great experience for everybody presenting and for everybody participating. And so it brought also a piece of family, right, in Seattle to me, to share friendship, collegiality, and to learn so much from you all, because I think mentorship continues after graduating. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a capacious question, but this is kind of drawing on what all of you have said, and Noralise has brought up the conference. So it's a capacious question, but it's also particular. I want you all to reflect on the conference, right? The annual Women of Color Collective conference, which it became the symbol of the collective. It, in a sense, embodied in this, within the space of the academy. It embodied all of these things that all of these experiences that you've also eloquently talked about. Friendship, collegiality, community building, feeling uplifted, right? Martha talked about a raft. Yeah, Manushka, the need to survive or finding your way. Sarah, that moment when that intense, that moment that comes after all this intense experience, where you feel the weight and you don't quite know, really, even though it's hopeful, you don't quite know how to move on, how to take these next steps. Life-saving was this other phrase, right? So the other thing that I have been thinking about with in the lead up to today, both in terms of the collective but also the conference, was how the collective and the conference came to articulate a definition of interdisciplinarity that we don't really see too often anywhere, where it's it's not about trespass and transgression, but really about fluidity and movement and conversation and collegiality. So my question is, how is asking you to again reflect on the conference itself, right? I mean, there was music, there's the academic presentation. So I want you to think about both the form, right, of the conference, the form that the conference took, but also the content, of it, and how it came to, in a sense, symbolize what this collective meant to you and to all of those who participated, in small and significant ways with the collective. Noralice, do you want to go first, since you had already started talking about the conference?
Yeah, the conference. So I didn't go to the first one, but I remember that the first one had a great keynote speaker, Chela Sandoval, if I recall. And so I thought, wow, this is big, right? Like, how do you, because I came with experience organizing conferences as part of the job I had in Puerto Rico, in the University of Puerto Rico. And so I knew how to do that, right? And I knew how to help the collective in thinking about panels and how to organize those pieces. I didn't know how to ask for money. And I didn't know how to invite a speaker. You know, there is so much labor behind that. And so I still use those skills, right? I ask for a lot of money, and so and so bringing it was a space where you can really see the work that is being done in such a big campus and beyond the campus, because I remember people from other campuses also came from Tacoma, from Bethel, and even from other universities, if I recall, because I met one Puerto Rican woman. I remember one Puerto Rican colleague presenting from a different institution. And so the need was there, right? The fact that this will gather so many people reflects that the need was there. And I remember feeling so much happiness after the conference, like the day off. I remember so much stress, you know, putting things in the last minute. And then I remember just feeling so good. And so, and so what I want to say is that the conference not only helped me to put into practice the skills I knew, sending call for the proposals, selecting, going through the process of and inviting other women of color, right, to make these selections of the panels and presentations, make all that work visible and feel that there is, so I'm not alone, right? And having the support of Angela Hinorio and the rest of the women color faculty on campus that were guiding us very strategically and will sit with us and hear us anytime and show up to the conferences. That was also another lesson I had in terms of representation and mentorship. And then the celebration, right, with music, with Marta's magic, and the people, right, from the community opening the space also from beyond the campus was enlightening for me.
Anyone wants to jump in?
I'll jump in. It just occurred to me that I still have the files for the programs, and not all of them are in software that I have anymore, but the first one is. And I was thinking, oh, let me look at what, because of the question about interdisciplinarity, right? And thinking of where we had people coming from. I had forgotten that we did a film screening. I think at least with the first two, I'm not remembering if we did with the third. But we had a film screening, pre-conference reception, and then I count 20 different presentations. We had concurrent sessions happening. We had, media studies. I'm doing a quick, it looks like comparative language and literature. We had, I think, some people from public health come in. So we had people from across the campus, including women's and gender studies, communication studies, clearly. I think we had some students from history as well. Lots and lots of different topics here across the campus and across not just our campus, but we pulled from other local. And I think by the third conference, we actually had a few people come internationally as well. So, there was in terms of scope, it was really broad. And it really strikes me now as well, how important it was that we included film, music, that poetry, that these were as important to incorporate in the conference as the academic presentations that were going on in concurrent sessions.
I'll just jump in really quick and say that I only attended and was only, lucky enough to attend the last one. I think the third was the last, right? And I think I still have, I have it here. I still have the bag. Like, this was so much work. There was swag, there was posters, there was frames then for like people, right, to take home, like for, the organize, like I still have some of my frames, like beautiful artwork. And so like the last one was at the law school. And I think one of the most significant aspects of the conference was the showing up of differing bodies in these ultra white spaces, right? And that the law school in particular was not made for us. It wasn't structured for us, but we freaking made it happen, right? It was still one of the most invigorating spaces that I think I've been in academia. And so, I just remember just sitting at the registration and seeing a lot of faculty that I was meeting for the first time, women of color faculty that weren't in, my direct areas of women's studies and, other units. And they just the joy and the happiness and the smiles on everyone's faces, because they knew that this was, going to be just a unique moment of carving out intentional space to resist, right? That our mere presence was resistance, I think was incredible to witness.
Martha, do you want to add?
I just want to say that in terms of the interdisciplinarity and the nature of it, I think that it shaped the conference, right? And I think that it's the people that came, that had the know-how, or the conference was shaped by the people themselves, right? And what they thought was important, and the gifts that they had, right? Or the interests, right? So none of it was ever, I never felt like it was ever, there were any real parameters as to like, this we can't do and this we can, or this shouldn't be in the conference and this should, right? I think that the people themselves, and again, bringing all of ourselves to the conference itself was what made the conference, what created the content itself, right? And of course, in the classes that we were all taking together, from Chicana feminisms to, women of color in academia and other courses, of course, we were always encouraged, right, to think of music and art as also as other ways of theorizing, right? Other ways of knowing. And so that really carried through. And so it wasn't the exception or even the entertainment, but it was just another important moment that we all needed to share as community. And I would say that a lot of these activities, including our dialogues, that were all based in and around the conviviality, right? The important work that conviviality also gives us as feminists, as women of color feminists in academia, and how important it was for us to really tend to that value system as well, right? The convivencia, the conviviality and nature, and the full-heartedness that we come to when we experience a real convivial moment.
I'll talk about money, because that's my jam. Because I will ask for $20 from everybody. So a part of, I think, what I want to also make sure we highlight is the support that we did get. And also the importance of us being in places later in our careers where we can offer that support to other folks. So again, so Relina likes to get money too. So it was, so the folks in Wired, right, told us where to go to get money.
Manushka, sorry,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do you want to just mention what Wired is?
Wired, women investigating
race, ethnicity.
Y'all can drop it in the box. It's a lot of letters. But Wired is really what WAC was modeled after, right? Because it was a lot of the folks in Wired who were offering support, offering resources. I don't know if these folks are on the call, but I see Juan when Juan directed GoMap was extra supportive. Luis was the first to say yes. And I think once he said yes to giving us funding, I was able to go to all the other units. I'm like, you'll be embarrassed if you say no because he said yes, right? And so I think a part of what we learned early was because he was in that position and said yes, we were able then to every year go to other places and continue to get support. So that's really, really, really important for us to think about. The places that we exist are where we can actually help folks, and the people who were in those places made sure that we got a lot of money. It was like tens of, I don't want to tell people our business. We could afford swag bags, right? And that's because of that support. So I just want to make sure that we highlight those folks who offered that support. And for interdisciplinarity, I think the initial conversations, it was like a joke, right? 2 English PhDs and a comp PhD walk into a bar. And so trying to figure out how to create abstracts initially, was a challenge with sort of like 2 disciplines. And as we included history, right, and Chicana studies, you saw that our abstracts became sort of more rich, and that it was our first time getting to review abstracts and choosing, right? And so, in some ways, I like the model that we created for what a conference looks like is what I want every conference to look like, where it's around the ideas and the questions versus like the specific discipline, right? And so there are panels that were crisscrossed across disciplines, and that was on purpose because we wanted people to, the conference was like communicating difference. So we wanted people to talk across difference and within difference. And semicolon, the last piece for the conference, and I think all of us learned something really important that we carry forward. I learned how much I love fundraising. Neuralis loves fundraising. We all have new things that we picked up, but I think I want to say it was like the first or second conference. It might be the second. Learning also to, as someone who in your head has all these plans, I think a lot of us are pretty much that way, to also learn to let go and trust your colleagues, right? So there was one point, Martha was like at lunch, hey, I got some friends that I brought over real quick. And I was like, oh, and then and that was the magic, right? And so she had a dream, I had a dream, we all had a dream. And I think letting go a little bit, right, allowed for, the other parts of that dream to emerge. And one of the most magical experiences of those 3 conferences was having that performance that was like, we were like, what just happened? We were all sitting there just like, is this happening? Is this happening? It's happening. So a part of the way that we organized allowed for these beautiful moments to happen that you would never find at a regular conference.
I want to add, Angela's reminding us that, in terms of the money, Manushka, right? So there were so many different sources of funding. So there was American Ethnic Studies, there was GWSS, there was Luis Fraga's office. I think it was called the Office of Diversity or something within the university. I think did communication, also.
Yeah, very early. GoMap, yeah. English.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there was little bits of money from little and big, right? Bits of money from different sources, which is also, I think, which in some senses speaks to the in one way the form and the interdisciplinarity of the conference. But that this is what you said, Manushka, at the end there. I want to underline again. This is. It really that's my memory of the of the conferences, is that it never, I mean, no other conferences felt like that before or since, and I think precisely because it was the panels were put together, the format, it was put together around ideas, right, rather than these sort of disciplinary boundaries and walls. And as Martha was pointing out, a lot of it, of course, depended on who chose to participate, right? Who brought themselves, and chose to speak in that moment. So this is, a number of you have touched on this already in some ways, but I want you to dwell on this a little bit. What kind of an impact, right, did the collective have on your intellectual and professional trajectory, right? So, thinking moving along these timelines? How has it influenced how you've navigated the academy since? Found solidarities, built alliances, and here I'm remembering. Again, one of the joys in preparing for this event was looking back at the film that Monica and Noralise made about the collective. I think that was what, year 2 or year 3? Year 3. Okay, yeah. And it was just, we were all so young, and but it was so, but it was lovely to hear. Again, think back about how all of you were thinking about, even in that moment, the process that went into conceptualizing and keeping the collective going. And so one of the lines that stood out to me there, and so this is what I'm connecting to this question, was the film talked about the collective as hoping to think about new ways, new theories of living and relating, right? And I think that you've all in different ways talked precisely about that being the experience of the collective. So what, in the trajectory that has, in the time that has followed, right, how has it shaped not just the, your professional getting tenure or going up for tenure, writing the book, right, but also getting the job, right, but also your intellectual projects, right? Well, how has the collective impacted you? Sarah, do you want to go first?
So to me, the key word here is collective, right? And I remember I saw the film recently when Angela sent it or somebody sent it. And I thought, oh, shoot, I haven't seen this for a while. And I was very surprised, not surprised, but happy, pleased with myself and proud of myself, as the end, right? And thinking at the very end, I said, in the future, I want to make sure that academia has no recourse but to recognize collective work. I was like, and honestly, when I was saying it, I totally didn't believe, like, I'm probably not going to live to see it, but that is the key right there, the collective, right? And how important it is for us to not only, yes, we can write about communities in our own silos and towards our own, promotions, right? Everything is about the high individualization of people, our careers, ourselves, where we basically market ourselves, and nobody knows that better than me. But a lot of the work that I try to engage in now, and especially after having made tenure, right, was to remind myself, like, okay, Marta, now, like, put your money where your mouth is. What are you going to do that's collective, that continues, that outlives you, but that is shared by many, right? And so to me, that is what I've been thinking about now, right? Where I thought about it the entire time. I couldn't have survived with all the different collectives that I'm a part of in academia, outside, within my own institution, beyond it. The memories of having been parts of collectives, of course, we're talking about this now, but it's also about how now it's like, okay, I'm co-writing different pieces with different people, because I'm not, that's not to say that I don't need to just write on my own, but I'm trying to really be more deliberate about writing as a duo or a trio, right? Publishing more things like that, pushing for those kinds of things, so that we also encourage community writing, right? Community-based writing. The collectives also encourage writing beyond the academy, not just between us who have PhDs and are privileged enough, but also with other communities. And of course, there's things to question, right? The imbalance, et cetera, who benefits overall, all of those things, right? But it nevertheless is the kind of work that we need to do, that we committed to when we realized that we couldn't survive without each other, and also that our works also now should reflect, or at least we need to encourage ourselves to continue at least a little bit towards that point. And so that's one of the things that I take with me, is that word, the collective, in mind, ideology, and in action.
I don't know if I'm supposed to follow that, but it's just beautiful. I think yes, I think absolutely the collective, the value of collective work is part of what we bring forward from this particular experience. And I think for me, some of that has manifested in collectivity around scholarship, but I think it also manifests in my approach to institutional work. The way that I see the kind of work that I need to do on my own campus. I know that the sort of go-to is we have to build connections. We have to build a sense of being in this together, of collaboration. There are lots of challenges to doing that, a lot, but having had the experience of being part of it and know what is possible, right? And I think that is so critical, even when working at a predominantly white Catholic institution in the red part of the state. I I have this broader network, right? I guess that comes back to also part of your question, Madhvi, of like the ways in which this prepared us to kind of move beyond. And I think for me, getting this job at this institution, when I got it at this institution, because it's changed a lot in the time that I've been here, having this network made that feel a lot more comfortable. Like I knew that I would have connections to this group, but also to the mentors in Wired and right, this kind of broader network as well. And I didn't fear the isolation in quite the same way as I think I would have had I not had those connections. So I think it's informed my current position in a variety of ways. One, it gave me that support to be able to kind of go into this strange space that I find myself in. And then that Neuralis came to as well, right? And so we find ourselves now collectively together in this strange space. But also then to know what the work can look like and what the possibilities are, and to have a kind of embodied sense of what that feels like when it works, right?
I'll just jump in. That's so powerful, Sarah. Exactly, right? I think that, even if it's not necessarily working, right? Even if in the way that perhaps you had anticipated, right? Or hoped for, that I think that having that experience, knowing what it felt like, right, is so important. I wanted to ask before I ask the others to reflect on that same question, Sarah. In that film, you had talked about your hope of these collectives sort of flowering in different institutions, so that we would take, you would take these wherever you go, and that there would be, collectives, women of color collectives there and everywhere, right? And so how has that, because you talked about you mentioned, or you referenced the difficulty in doing this institutionally. So is that hope still there? How has that hope, what shape is it taking now?
That also struck me in rewatching. And I think the thing is that what things are going to look like in different institutions is different, right? What the needs are and what the possibilities are different. And so what can happen at Gonzaga is really different than what can happen at the University of Washington in that moment, in that time, with the people that were there, right? And I think one of the challenges here is for the really intense underrepresentation, and the fact that women of color who are hired at GU don't often have the experiences of collectivity prior to coming, right? And I think many times are unaware that they're missing it because they haven't had it, right? And so there's a challenge to interdisciplinarity, in part because we're also, we talk a lot about interdisciplinarity, but I don't think people really get it. and we're very siloed, we're very hierarchical because we're Catholic, and so everything's kind of centralized and very hierarchical. And so it makes it very difficult to do this kind of interdisciplinary, like truly interdisciplinary work. And the way that I've kind of been trying to find the place for that is through faculty diversity initiatives, through work on the postdoc that is part of what brought Neuralis to Gonzaga. And that was something I got involved in very early at Gonzaga. I think it was my very first year that I was there that I started working on that project. And that was kind of my vision of like how I could bring this experience in some, completely different form to this particular place. And I really wanted the postdoctoral fellows to at least have that with each other. Mm-hmm. If we couldn't build that as a kind of bigger campus-wide experience. And I have no idea whether they really were able to have that with each other. Neuralis could speak better to that than I could, but.
And there is so much in what you're saying that I would like to expand, and it's the word possibility. Mm-hmm. And that is because I had really good mentors in Puerto Rico that showed me possibilities, and those possibilities took me to Connecticut to do my master's. But it was something that I didn't have to think about race or ethnicity, because I did have my racial privilege in Puerto Rico, right? And so when I came to Connecticut, I was introduced to women of color theory. And when I go to Seattle, I already have that intellectual background, other forms of collective work in Connecticut. And so it made sense to me. And it exposed me to a different kind of identity that as a Latina I had to face in the United States, right? And so it helped me navigate the social as well as the institutional, and seeing possibilities, but also right, expanding my possibilities to a different perspective, but also noticing and learning about the paths that I was walking that were already walked by other women, right? Because that's what I think we learn from our mentors. And I learned that gets, that is the collective work, right? Like it gets everywhere, because then Sarah goes to Gonzaga and works in the postdoc that I eventually applied to, and here I am. And so now that I just had access to a parental leave, right? Those are struggles that women and women of color particularly had before us. And so was very helpful to appreciate that, to value that, and to continue doing that labor. And that's what I think where I apply the best, what I learned from the collective now, and the fact that I'm still here, right? That I'm still in academia, and I think that's it.
Thank you, Neuralis. Manushka.
Okay. I was like, which M is gonna go next? I love how our names are like so similar. So I had my initial answer, and Angela said I couldn't say that, and so I'm gonna change my answer because I think a part of what happens for me is I think you and I, Mabi, were the first to leave. We were sort of like, the first to leave, and I was like, I got out, and I was like, I spent 3 years with people that I could go have coffee with people who would read my stuff, with people who I could complain to about everything, or try to bribe to go to the mall with me, right? And then I sort of like left, and they were all still there, and then I wasn't. So I was really challenged by sort of being sort of like the first out, right? Or us being sort of the first out. And within my postdoc, I found people, we were very like international, but it was never kind of the same. And I think, this is my second tenure track job. And so, the challenge also is in how do you find people who not just are people of color, but are people of color who have a similar sensibility, who have a similar sense of responsibility to each other and the world. And I think that is a challenge that I think for anybody who kind of does this kind of work that we do, and I think we all do very similar work in different ways and in different genres. So for me, I think deeply and often about how to navigate institutional barriers to collectivity. And Chela Sandoval, I remember when she said this, and I was all high on life. And she was like, collectivities are not meant to last. I was like, this is the first year. I'm gonna need you to not say that, right? And so I just remember being like, no. And of course, part of, what she says is true, right? We create what we need in the moment that we need it, and it may not be the same in other places. And so in many ways, I've been chasing the same sort of like experience that I now know I'm not going to find anywhere else because of the people who were there in that moment, right? Even if we overlap, Monica and I only overlapped for a year, right? But then they, like the group continued, even though, I was gone, and then, Martha and Sarah were gone, right? So as we move through, people continue to work together. So I always want to meditate on how do we, like Sarah Morales say, how do we create environments where we can find each other, where we don't necessarily rely on the category of color to find each other. But, how do we identify people who want to do this kind of work, who are committed to what Martha says, which is the collective, right? So I think something that happens for me now, in doing my work. So I ended up in a gender studies department, right? As a job. And that would not have happened if I hadn't taken all of these classes. I'm like, do they know I have enough of a degree, right? But I think all of my understanding of gender sexuality studies, right, comes from this group. And I connect that with all that I've learned in communication, and it makes me a different kind of scholar than I think a lot of folks that I encounter. So I'm grateful for that because I have a job. Thank you all. But in terms of moving ahead and thinking about how to be, I'll borrow the words collectivity, possibility, because I want to be in places where I can say, hey, you're new here. How can I help you? How can I support you? And not worry about how the institution will penalize me or them. Or, if I co-author with somebody, right, how that, that will be a penalty for one or the other. And so one thing that I've been trying to do since I got to the UW, and I think I give a lot of credit to Relina because her mentoring framework, I basically borrow, is really to make sure that there are people coming behind you. And if there's hard work to do, to make space for those people, that you have the power to do that work. And so you do that work. So that's what I've been trying to do. And I do it more now because I have tenure, right? And so I'm like, which junior scholar needs, to do a few talks, right? Before they go up for whatever. So that's kind of the interventions I think I'm learning to make. But again, all of that comes from being trained by these scholars and being trained by you all.
Monica?
I think I'll just say that I'm in my first tenure track job. It hasn't been the most supportive or positive experience. And I would have left a long time ago, probably this year or last, had I not had that imprint of looking for us, right? And as soon as I landed at ASU, I had heard that there was a Faculty Women of Color caucus. And I was like, yo, that might be a place. But again, is it are they working in the same type of way, right? Are they working in that similar framework? And at first they weren't. And then a new cohort came in. And then that just sort of similar to what Manushka did was like, there was the president at the time sort of cherry picked, like, you can do this, you can do this. And really that's what we need sometimes, right? Is that somebody that sees our potential and sees us as, recognizes us, right, as important contributors to the work that we're doing. And so I think that having that imprint, having that model helped me just to seek it out once more, once I was out and sort of out of my like beautiful, shell, is that I was able to connect pretty quickly to the other women of color faculty. And surprise, surprise, the challenges are different, but not, right? And so a lot of the structural, I think learning to read the structural in a way that I wouldn't have known to think about had not Angela in one of our first classes of Women of Color in Academia broken down the academic structure, right? It's just like went with the whiteboard with the marker and just like broke it down. And I was like, oh, it's all connected and it's all working in a very deliberate way to keep all of the necessary information to succeed away from us, right? So learning that I had to learn how to code in a different way with, you know, the people that had learned the language and was able to adapt it is what ultimately I think has helped me survive, even as I have all these privileges, even as, you know, somebody that, you know, has been able to cultivate, you know, other spaces. I think having this particular space of women of color, again, of the recognition of seeing them as family, I think continues to be key in my own, you know, work.
Yeah, that it's all, this is, you know, such powerful stuff. I want to open it to questions from our lovely audience here as well. You know, you can raise your hand and I'll be able to see you, and you know, you can ask your question directly. If you want to put it in chat, if that's preferable, that's fine too. But yeah, you know, any questions or thoughts that have come up as these lovely ladies have been talking are welcome.
I just want to make a quick note that guests are now able to unmute their microphones if they wish.
I don't think they know they can unmute. Do you want to tell them?
Yeah, you can unmute if you would like to now. Okay, as we you know, as we wait for folks to ask their questions, let me ask another one. You know, so I'm struck by, I mean, I'm struck by one of the many interesting themes that has come up in this conversation, which is the, you know, and this is not a surprise. I don't think this is a surprise to any of you, knowing my predilections. But this, you know, I'm struck by what you all are saying about the structure and the, you know, so the universe, or let me put it this way, the global, the universal, and the particular, right? As both a productive possibility as well as a constraint, as well as these, you know, these limits. So what was possible at the University of Washington at that time, right, in history, when we all made our way through our different programs. And then there were distinct limits, even as we were, you know, going through this. But what was possible within that structure is not necessarily possible, right, in quite the same way in other institutions, in other spaces. So you know, what made it possible? Like, how did it, you know, is it, I mean, that's you know, it sounds facetious, but like, what made this collective possible, other than Manushka's kind of insistence that we all just do, you know, the tasks that are delegated to us, but and the energy. I mean, how is it that we found us, right? I think is that's such a nice phrase that one of you mentioned, right? Finding us. How does it? Because this is, you know, it has been a challenge, right? I think you've all articulated it. I've had similar challenges. It's been difficult to find the right kind of sensibilities, collegiality, comradeship, right? In other spaces, in other locations. So what were the conditions of possibility, I guess, is what I'm asking. Manushka, do you want to
I
start?
can try. No, I was like, tell me what we did so I can do it again, because I want the formula. And I think a part of, for me, what is so interesting to hear y'all talk about being voluntold is I'm in a sorority, so I was hazed. And so a part of that hazing, I mean, I probably shouldn't tell y'all that. It was 1999. I didn't know better. Is, a part of, I think, what was really important, and all those coffees and dates, right, was to really sort of suss out the question of sort of like ways of being and ways of seeing. Because I think a part of what could easily happen is, you send out a call based on sort of an identity, and you get some folks back, and it doesn't necessarily work in the ways that we imagine. So I mean, if you read the work of anybody in these 6 boxes, you'll see why it worked, right? Because the politics were really sort of explicit, and because and I mean, I'm always awkward when I hear my name, because I mean, I do this thing like we, and then like the institution puts my name on it, right? And so, I mean, I think a part of what was and is really helpful is that we spent time in class, right? And we had those hazing coffees, right? Where it could have not been a match, but Monica could be like, that's one, she sounds like she is not, I'm good, right? And so I think a part of it is that we spent time getting to know each other, right? One person vouched for another person. And even though it was us doing the work, we also had, I'm thinking of Julie Kay, right? There were other women of color who were not necessarily, couldn't engage in the same level, but they were there to do the work also. So the day of, there was a working committee, they volunteered, right? And so there were people outside of us who also had similar ways of wanting to function and to see the world. And that's who, sort of got drawn to the group.
I think the other piece of this is the awesome possibility of being a student, right? I think that's probably the biggest obstacle that we're all facing, is that we're not students, we're employed by institutions, and that constrains us in fundamentally different ways. And I think there's, a kind of possibility that opens up, I mean, the importance of the classroom spaces, and there were many of them, right, is so, and we named a few, but I think there were many more, because these people that we are talking about who also participated that are not here today were met in other classrooms. And sometimes it's just one-to-one, I met this really cool person in this class that I took all the way over there, and I'm going to bring them in. And so those opportunities to connect as students in classroom spaces, I think are not as present. Like, I'm not going to meet, I mean, maybe it's happened once or twice that I met somebody at a curriculum committee meeting, but the possibilities in a curriculum committee meeting are just so fundamentally different than in a Chicana feminism course, right? And I think that is really, really important. And I think it's part of the reason that these classroom spaces and student work is so important, because there are opportunities that students have that you just don't have elsewhere in academia.
The mentors are having a whole conversation in the chat box, which is also hilarious.
Yeah, I want to actually, let me, because now we do have some questions. Relina, I see your hand, but I want to ask Shirley Yee's question. Shirley is asking, how do you integrate your experiences with the Women of Color Collective in your teaching? And this, I mean, Sarah, I'm using your comments as a point of departure here for this question. Your teaching of both undergraduates and graduate students. Monica, Martha, Noralise, do you want to start us off?
I'll just say really quickly what I've learned is to try and see the whole human, right? Or try and always keep in mind that we come to our work as a whole person, right? Going through things, going through challenges, going through life. And especially in this last year, I am appalled by how many of my colleagues have not given students any slack, for anything. And think that's bullshit. So I think I'm very angry, obviously, about that, because I think we have to, you know, the institution wants to cut us up, right? Literally and figuratively, and wants to separate our mind from our body, from our spirit, from everything, from our community, right? And so I think stepping into that classroom, knowing that these I have no idea what a lot of these students are going through. I can't even fathom. And I need to make room for that is probably the biggest lesson I've learned.
Another question that we have is about mistakes, right? So I'm curious, the question is, I'm curious to hear more about unexpected mistakes, lessons learned, difficulties in sustaining such fluid collectivity, logistics to the conferences, writing together. So we've talked about, you know, a lot of the things that worked. You know, what about mistakes? Does anyone want to reflect on that?
I will. I think that something that I was actually thinking about this question prior to this event, and I think something that I really would rethink if we were to do this again is to think about the exclusions inherent in the women and women of color. And this was a question we were faced with at the time, right? By non-binary people of color, is this a space for me? And at the time, my response was, of course it is. But I think in the years since then, it has become so much more evident to me that my assumption that it was safe and inclusive was not enough to make it safe and inclusive. And that I think that's something that needs to change in future kind of manifestations of this type of collectivity.
That's great. Relina?
Hi, so good to see all of y'all. I don't have a question, but I did want to say, and this was evident to me as I was watching Monica's documentary, a little 10-minute documentary about the forming of the walk, was first of all, that you all were so young, but so were we. I was watching, you know, Ileana and myself and Michelle and Anila, and I was like, oh my gosh, and Nirales, right? We were all so young, Sarah, but in that point, I mean, I was an assistant professor, and the walk was so important for me. I didn't know how to mentor. We're not, you know, as students, as graduate students, we're not really taught how to mentor. We have models, and I had some positive models and some not so positive models, and I just tried to do the best that I could, but I was learning as much from you all and how you all were with each other. As I mean, you all are heaping the praise on us, but I really want to say that really seeing what you all were creating was tremendously just inspirational, and kept me going, really. And taught me then how to mentor and also do a certain type of institution building. You know, at that point, I put in the chat, part of the reason I think that y'all built this magic thing, because there was nothing there. And so you built it for yourselves. And I learned how to do some of that from you guys. So I want to thank you for that process, and just wonderful to see you here.
Relina, since we have you, do you want to say a little bit about Wired too? I mean, because that was, as Manushka has mentioned, right? That was it was important to the collective.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess I'd say something about Wired, and so can Michelle, and I don't know if there's other Wired faculty here. You know, Wired took a really different tact, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about it. I was preparing something for a conference, this fugitive something. I should know the name of the conference. It's like it's an unconference conference. Everyone's into the unconference these days, right? But Wired was, the way that I'm talking about Wired there is, Wired was trying to take this, and still is, I think, a ghost presence, right? There's one teeny tiny article that OMAD did on Wired, like back in 2009. That's the only thing you're gonna ever find. And so intentionally, I think we had a conference that celebrated whatever anniversary of Wired, and we brought out Val Smith, and that was a wonderful, lovely thing because we had some money that we had to spend. But for the most part, we were trying to actually not be incorporated into the institution, right? And so I think it was a desire to be visible to each other for Michelle and myself, and now we have 70 something members, like for all of us to see each other and to connect with each other. But we didn't want to create events in the way that you all were. And I think that now that you all are faculty, you see how many events you already have to create. So you can see, so we're like, why would we want to, without support from the university, create more? Right? We're already being tasked with this. And so many of us, we were hired, I was hired in 2005 to diversify my department in terms of in body and scholarship and curriculum. And this was the case for so many of us. I see Michelle's hand too.
Yeah, Michelle.
Hi there. Do I put my hand down? I don't know how that works. Or can you do that? Or
I've got you covered. You're fine.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful to see everybody and see everybody on the call. And Madhuvi, you're from you're calling in from UC Santa Cruz.
Yes.
Oh, so beautiful, right? Because my first encounter with women of color in conflict and collaboration, right, was our collective at UC Santa Cruz as undergrads. And we had the most incredible mentor, Angela Davis, right? And so, I ad nauseum, I know my students have heard me tell stories, but and all of us who have left, Kehalani, Kanui, Maylee Blackwell, Deb Vargas, I could just go down the line of all the scholars who came out of that collective and how we're still networked. But just to say just to reiterate what Relina said, really, you kind of built an infrastructure, right? That we as faculty could support you in our guidance and our mentoring, but we also had things to do. We had a lot to do. We had many things on our plate, but so that you were, we gave you some hints and we gave you enough, right? But you took it completely and ran with it and created an infrastructure. And that infrastructure not only supported you all, but a lot of students in the department and outside of the department. And I remember students coming from Comp Lit, School of Social Work, across the whole university, they would come to get the support and they could see the amazing graduate collective work you were doing. So I do want you to acknowledge that and honor that. And yes, Relina was there, and Angela, of course, who mentored all of us, right? So, including myself, right? So we were able to put the little pieces, because we all were scattered in our time, but you could put the little pieces together and aggregate, and you took the pieces from all the place and made something beautiful in the aggregate. So I just want to applaud you. But and I think probably people are interested in the kind of mistakes and some of the bumps, because you have to be honest, like anything, there are, in any collective, there are some bumps and that you have to get through sometimes, but yay to you all.
And my memory is so bad. I was like, what happened? So I think, let me see. I'm sure there were lots, right? I think I wish I'd enjoyed it more because apparently I'm A-type or whatever. And so I had maps and charts, and I think I didn't enjoy the process as much because I was so really focused on getting the stuff done. And I think most of us could probably say that, right? I don't know. I'm just speaking for folks. Academics tend to be A-type. So I think that's a thing, but also I think what was helpful is when stuff happened, we adjusted, right? The ECC, which was the heart of our existence, closed. And so we were we counted on that being the space, right? And we had to adjust. So everything that kind of happened, we adjusted. I think a part of what was really helpful is that people just had different skills, right? And so Sarah's very mellow, Martha's very mellow. I'm working on getting mellow. You're mellow, right? So I think where one of us fell.
My partner disagrees.
Well, I think you're in my life, you're mellow. So I call you to calm me down. We're gonna have problems. So I mean, I think that's a part of the hard thing. I don't remember as much. I think like, you know, without ever telling people stuff, like, you know, like last minute people disappear, and not us necessarily, right? Things go wrong, and we had to, and you know, we've had to adjust. I wish I mean, for me, that I did a better job like staying connected with the group, but I also knew I had to let go because the group had to become what it became. That was advice from Dr. Joseph, to just let go. And I'm like, you know, and for it to become what it is or not. So
3 minutes.
I think it's really important to first recognize that what happened is beautiful, and it was like a force of nature. It happened, and then it went away. I think that in retrospect, I think that besides the things that everybody else have mentioned, I think what we would also be great in anything we build from here on out is to, once it's somewhat stabilized, if at all, that as we do it with others, right, as we're building with others, that we make sure that we're also, that mentorship is part of that, so that these things outlive us, right? That these things, more women can have, more folks involved in walk can have that, right? It would have outlived us. And so I think that part of what I try to think about now is how to not only delegate and make that an important kind of work, but that it is also, that there's also mentorship involved within that activity, so that students can then, usher in the next generation that will take it, and it'll probably change, but it's the nature of how things work, right? And how we need to continue to adapt to this institution that is always finding these really keen ways of isolating us and making us do more and more.
Thank you all. We have a minute and a half to go. And so I want to thank all the audience that stayed with us through the conversation, the wonderful panelists who came from afar on Zoom to be with us. And I wanted to remind you all that if you go to the link that I have provided that ends with Celebrates 50 Years, you will find the videos that Monica de la Torre and Noralis Rodriguez, Clementine Bordeaux, Cass Harnett, and Karen Wang, and Jovita Mercado have produced in the present and in the past about the history of GWSS. So please take a minute to check on that. I really want to thank everybody, and good night.